Hello, and welcome back to that Eurovision site, Eurovision with a Slice of Life. My name is Rosie, and I am delighted to be joined today for a little collaboration with the lovely Danny from Phoenix ESC. How are you doing today, Danny?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. We are delighted to be joined by our friends from Phoenix for this little collaboration. And Danny was Phoenix's correspondent for this year's national final for Malta. And today we are going to be discussing all of our thoughts on the MESC process. So, MESC was held this year as a rather long and rather a very full contest. We had 40 entrants taking place over three quarterfinals and a recap show, and then a semi-final, and then a grand final, which ultimately culminated in the Busker winning the competition, who will be going to Eurovision with their song Dance, open brackets, Our Own Party, close brackets. So, Danny, first of all, what I wanted to ask is what were your general thoughts on MESC as a competition this year?
As a competition, I think it was there were a few good songs in the lineup. I think there was a few quite big names in the lineup, which was good to see, such as like Aiden, Brooke, but there was also a lot of newcomers, which I like to see as well. It's you're not just seeing the same acts, you're getting acts that are from other competitions who have never taken part in MESC before, such as the Busker. And it's just nice to see that there's so much. There was a little bit more diversity. I'm sure we'll touch on this at a later point, but I think it was good that there was so many acts as well. I think although it was a lot to get through, at least more artists were able to have their moment to shine in the spotlight. Um, I think the quarterfinals were. I think when I first heard it, I thought this is an interesting move because it's always been the semis and final. It's like I don't think they've ever done quarterfinals before, but I was kind of expecting something like the music video, so that on Easty Lau, on like I was kind of expecting something like that, or if they just had the 30-second snippet videos that they did, I was kind of thinking that they just published the full version of that and use that as the competition. But no, overall, I think although it was a lot to get through, I think it was quite enjoyable, and it was nice to hear quite a lot of the songs and everything, really.
Brilliant. Yeah, it was such a huge national final, and it did seem like it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And each of the shows lasted so long because you'd get like the song and then an ad break and then a little interview and then an ad break and then a song and then an ad break. And I mean, Malta does have something of a reputation for this on all of their TV broadcasts, but seeing a little bit of Malta was always nice in those adverts as well. And I think what you said about the fact that, yes, we did have some really sort of familiar names coming back, previous Eurovision participants, previous junior Eurovision participants, names who have been in the national final so many times before. We did get these sort of emerging acts coming out as well. And for an island that has such a small population, it's really nice to see the sort of diversity of music. And I think you really touched on that actually we got music from quite a wide variety of genres. And I think that does show in the winner, which, yes, it is a sort of, it's a friendly pop track, but it's got that really nice sort of unique element when it comes to the brass section as well. And I think that it's nice that somebody who has previously been a complete unknown in the national final really was given the opportunity to shine and to see that people really took to them as well. So I wanted to ask you what your favorite songs were from this year's competition.
Um, so anyone who knows me will know the first answer I'm going to say was Regina by Aiden. But I also really liked Brooke with Checkmate. That was a good song. I thought she would win, to be honest. I liked Ryan in the silence. I do like the Busker. I do like that song. That was quite I think the staging really elevated the song and it just looked so cool visually and like live in that. Um Also Kirsty was robbed. Gotta say that. But no, I think there was quite a few that I liked this year. Aiden and Brooke, oh Nathan as well. Nathan was a good song. I think we could see him in future MESCs because that was his first one. Um, so yeah, there was quite a few that I liked.
I feel like I'm going to come in with that with some completely different names. I think the ones you've mentioned were brilliant. I did really particularly like Aiden, and I'm going to get onto that whole thing a little bit later as well. But the ones I wanted to point out, first of all, Maria de Bono was robbed.
She was.
J'Alegria should have made it to the semis. I'm gutted that one didn't. It was my favorite song in Maltese after Regina in the national final, and I would have as someone, if you've listened to any sort of TES output on Malta before, I have really been wanting a song in Maltese for a while. And I would have really liked to just see that get a little bit further. I also really liked Maxine with Alone. I thought she had one of the best vocals of this competition. Every time I saw her on stage, I felt like I was in a pair of really safe hands, and I really enjoyed her performances as well. I can't really do this bit either without mentioning the king, the icon that is Matt Black. I'm not sure, I can't necessarily tell whether he's a favorite of mine or whether he just really stood out in that competition. But I think the last couple of years, he's really brought such an energy to the contest as well. And I can kind of go here on there as to whether I actually like the music that he's bringing, but I do think he's bringing something really fresh to the contest, and it absolutely stands out amongst the songs that are being shown in the contest as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think although Matt Black's one of the most talked about contestants in MESC the past couple of years, he does bring something that is different, whether people like it or not. And he got a really big crowd reaction when I was watching the final. It like they were really enjoying it. So I thought this could actually do a lot better than we think. And to be, I think people forget just how well come around did last year as well. And I think with him doing it again this year, he was a potential for top five. And the jury, surprising. I was kind of expecting the juries not to go for that, but him winning with the juries was such a surprise to me. But I'm good. I'm happy for him. I'm sure. And I think the televote, um, yeah, he came something like joint fifth with the televote, I think, something along those lines. But so he did really well. I Maria was good. I was kind of thinking, oh yeah, this is good. She should safely qualify, and then just being confused when she didn't make it. I'm thinking, okay, maybe what's gone wrong there. But Maxine, yes, she was a favorite, and she was a deserved favorite. She was really good, and I think she was came second with the televote, but only just. But yeah, she did really well. Um, but yeah, there's a few that have done really well, and I think like it's showing, like you mentioned about the diversity. Just going back onto Matt Black, there weren't really many rap songs as such, and again, that was one of the reasons why he stood out. He does bring a really confident energy, and it's instantly memorable, and that must have really struck a chord with the juries. So yeah.
Definitely. So, one of the things I did want to ask you about is the format that MESC took this year, which was quite an interesting format. So, we had the quarterfinals. First of all, we had three of them rather than four, which I admit is confusing to me at the very least. And the way that the quarterfinals were done is they were essentially sort of bare performances. So it was the artist, and the artist stood there singing the song with no backdrop, no real staging. or anything like that. And then we had, out of the 40, we had 24 move on to the semi-final. And then we had, I think it was 16. I'm going to need to check my Wikipedia page at this point. Yep, 16 move on to the grand final. So what did you think of the general format of MESC, and would you make any changes to it when or if MESC comes back as a national selection?
I think the format was, like you say, an interesting one. When I read it was 4 quarterfinals of 40 songs, I think you'd naturally assume that there'd be 10 in each quarterfinal, and then 6 would go through. But this was not the case. I think I would definitely, if they're gonna do quarterfinals again, I would definitely get them to change it to this format only because it's fairer. Because I think it was arranged with, I think 2 of the quarterfinals had 13 and the third one had 14, but it was only the top 8 of each semi that went through. So naturally, the semi where the 14 acts are in, it actually puts them at a slightly more of a disadvantage because there's one more act that's going to get eliminated. And although you didn't really notice this in the fourth quarter final where they revealed the results, it was 8 of each semi that went through in the end. So when it got to the last act, you kind of knew it was going to be someone from this particular semi, or particular quarterfinal rather. So yeah, I think that's a change I'd make, or just or at least word it as a heat rather than a quarterfinal. And then the although the fourth one was kind of like a whole red carpet celebration, it was quite cool to watch actually. Like they just jazzed up the whole studio, which was nice to see, and then revealed the results there and then. But I'd say if they want to do that, that's fine. But I think that quarterfinal thing, they should be a bit fairer in that respect, or maybe have like or at least make sure that the 3 heats have the same number of acts, even if it was 39. At least then it could be the top 8, and then it's just fairer for everyone. And then I think the semis 24. I think that is fair. It's kind of similar to what we're used to. And for the final, I think there was 17 last year because I think they had a wild card. But no, I think 16 was a good number for the final. I've seen some people say, like on the fandoms and that, say they kind of could have just gone straight into a final, or just had those 24, or just had those 16. But at the end of the day, it gives more people a chance to have their moment on stage, and I think that's another. I think it is kind of sad that the other 16 acts we don't get to see what they would have had for their staging or anything. All we got was just the LED background and them singing it. It doesn't really tell you a lot, and they may have had big plans, which is a shame. But yeah, I think overall I think the format's okay. There just needs to be maybe a little 1 or 2 tweaks, I think, just to make sure it's fair. That's my honest opinion, but I think although it was a confusing format, they made it work for them, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I have to admit, so much of this format confused me. I mean, they go 40 acts, and then you're going to have quarterfinals, and then they release the list of participants for the first quarterfinal, and there's 13 on there, and I was like, the maths does not go like this in my brain. I don't see how we're doing this at this point. So I think renaming them as heats, making them more equal, or just making it a little bit clearer as to how the process is actually working, and communicating that in terms of how many acts are going to be in each show, I think would have been really, really helpful. I think one thing that I also wasn't especially a big fan of is not having the voting open until after all of the heats had happened. Because I think when you are looking at acts who performed 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think it's much harder to have that sort of fair comparison. So I think if I were to change it, I would have the voting be done after each heat, and then I'd probably announce the results during that show. But if they wanted to leave them, I'm not gonna die on that particular hill. Um, I have a little bit of a pet peeve for any sort of national final that does one semi-final where a load of people perform and then just puts act straight through to a final where you're just getting the same things again. So in what I would probably do is I would split it into two semi-finals, and then we still have the ability for acts to have their moment to shine, especially if we've got 24 of them, two shows, 12 acts. It's much more manageable, I think. And then you still end up being able to get the same number into the final as well, and giving everybody an opportunity to shine as well. I know a couple of countries do it. I know Latvia does it as well. And I don't get it, because you're not going to get something different from one week to the next. It is nice to have the opportunity to see the songs a few times, but if everyone's competing against each other twice, I don't get why you're doing that all just as one show, essentially. I did find the way that they did the presentation of them really interesting. How they moved from sort of that real focus on the performer and the song all the way to that sort of full presentation that we got in the semi-finals and the final as well. I didn't like it at first, and actually it's kind of grown on me since. I think seeing how songs have changed from the heats to the final as well, I thought was really interesting, and actually I quite enjoyed it in the end. I thought seeing it as we were watching those heats, I thought it was sometimes quite difficult to get through. But I think once we saw how the whole shape of the national final worked, I think it made a lot more sense. So yeah, I just hopefully make things slightly clearer and slightly less confusing in terms of the voting, essentially.
Yeah, I think yeah, that was another point I forgot to mention. Yeah, I agree. I think they could have just opened the act like the voting lines for for each heat on the night itself, because I think there were a couple of confused people in again the fandom thinking, oh, do we know who goes through tonight? And it's like, no, no one goes through. We only find out until the fourth quarter final or the recap show. Um, half of me understands why they've done it, because they wanted to give everyone a fair chance, but at the same time, I think because people are so focused on the acts that you have in the first heat, it makes sense to prioritize on them. And if it's only a certain amount of those acts that go through, then at least it's still the job is still done. It's just a probably slightly easier way of doing it. And although I know, like I say, I think that a lot of the I noticed on social media that a lot of the most of the acts had like parties and stuff together, so that may have been part of the reason. I'm not sure. And I guess we wouldn't have had the full red carpet celebration as well, knowing if we knew who had gone through already. So maybe they've done it for that. And but yeah, I think I said I kind of there's pros and cons to it. I think yeah, the presentation I think I was it was okay. I think again it was confusing at first because there was a few people that were expecting the intro song, the now infamous intro song that was coming after each um like artist, and they're like, oh, is this the song? And some people were saying, oh, this is such a good song, like is this one of the entries? And it's like, no, this is just like the montage of pictures that they use. But it was kind of funny in the end. Everyone was just really excited for this song. But yeah, another thing is, but this is more of a Maltese television thing, is there was an advert straight after like the intro. So again, people were like, why? I think the first one I saw was a man painting, and I'm like, what's going on here? Because again, I'm not used to this format where there's an ad like right in the middle of the show. I'm so used to them being in the breaks, but again, that's more of a Maltese television thing. And likewise, you do get a little ding or something, which is like an advert in the corner of the screen, and you get it with every artist without fail. But it does wake, if any fans are being bored, it wakes them up, I guess. So it works. Um, but yeah, I think once you get used to the format and how it's presented, then I think it's fine. Um, uh, that's the thing. I think again in future maybe there could have been a little bit more clarification on how it was presented, but I think that's just more of a case of Euro fans not really understanding like how the television thing works in Malta because it's so different here, for example. Um, but yeah, overall it was good presentation, I think.
I feel like the Maltese adverts are just like an infamous thing in this fandom at this point. And you did also pick up on something that I also wanted to touch on, which is that intro music. I want more of it. Can I have a full song of this, please? I think there is possibly something maybe wrong with your national final when your intro music is better than a lot of the songs that you're hearing. But every time that music came on, I was just having the best time of my life. I loved it. And that montage of all of those artists in that tinfoil room was just I I miss it slightly. I'm not gonna lie. I miss my Friday nights sat in my bath usually jamming out to that music and those little montages of the artists before the songs started to play. I have fond memories of that. And yeah, the adverts were certainly an experience. It's just you're listening to a lovely song or something like that, and then you get a little ping, and it's like, "Ooh, M&S." And I went to Malta over last summer, and honestly, the joy that the Americans I was with experienced finding out that M&S was in Malta was genuinely delightful, and it just reminded me of that every time I heard it. So I wanted to move on to one of the biggest things about the national final and one of the biggest dramas of this season so far, which is Aidan's disqualification. So Aidan, who was a big fan favourite from last year's national final, he performed Ritmu and came second to Emma Muscat, returned this year with his song Regina. Regina took part in the first the first heat, quarterfinal, whatever term we're using. And then it was announced a little bit later on that Aidan had been disqualified from the competition for breaking rules. And there was a little bit of a debate around what rules had Aidan actually broken. And it later turned out that the rules that they were basically saying that he had broken were all to do with the promotion of his entry and particularly on social media. Artists were I've got the text up. He engaged in marketing personnel, marketing officials, marketing companies, or the engagement into some sort of marketing or promotional campaign or activity by the artists to promote themselves, the song, their participation, or in some way to influence the public vote, and the publication of any social media posts, promotion material, interviews, or any media presence from the announcement of the quarterfinalists onwards. And so, what PBS, the Maltese broadcaster, was saying is that Aidan had made multiple social media posts that he shouldn't have made, basically promoting his entry. And they had warned Aidan previously to say, "Stop doing this, mate." And Aidan went, "Nope," and kept promoting it. And he was disqualified from the competition. And there was a big petition launched to bring him back. Aidan's team threatened to sue PBS, claiming that he had been singled out and that other contestants were also doing similar sorts of things. And ultimately, he ended up dropping the potential threat of a lawsuit, basically saying that if this were to happen, the entire MESC could have been cancelled. And instead, he came back for the final. He performed as an interval act. He didn't sing Regina. He sang Ritmu and Naseb Fik, which are his previous entry and one of his biggest hits in Malta. So I wanted to ask you, Danny, what were your thoughts on everything that happened with Aiden? What did you think about the entire situation?
Oh, the first thing I just want to say, just very quick, going back onto the intro music, is that needs to be played at Euro Club in Liverpool. Just get it on the speakers, like, come on. But yes, that was an experience. So yeah, for those who don't know me, Aiden is one of my favorite artists, to be honest. Ritmu was one of my favorite songs of the year, so I was so excited to see he was coming back with Regina, and I was so excited for the snippet and thought he does have a good chance here. Um, so yeah, when I got the notification from everyone, I had about like 10 messages tagging me saying, Danny, have you seen what's happened? And I'm like, I thought it was a joke at first. It was like one of those jokes someone in the fandom would make, oh, the favorite's been disqualified or something because of whatever. And then I kept reading the messages like, oh my God, this is real. Like so yeah, I was gutted to put but unfortunately rules are rules, I guess. And I think it was a bit vague to begin with, and I think that's what there was so much confusion among the fandom of what rule he could have possibly broke. And I think when it was first said it was social media, um, it again, I think people wanted a little bit more information. But I guess from a broadcaster point of view, they don't want it everything said straight away, I guess. But yeah, I think um it was a really sad story because I think that was definitely one of the favorites, and I think Aiden definitely had big plans of how he wanted to present his song for the semi-final and the final. And he was really committed. I think on his Instagram story, I think went to North Macedonia, I think, with his composer, and I think this was back in June. So the song had been made ready for a while. So they'd had this all planned out after Ritmu came second. Like him and his team were really determined, I think, to go for the win. So I think again, it's such a shame that it's ended up the way it has. Um, in terms of the social media rules, I noticed there were a few other artists who were also promoting stuff on social media. However, there was one thing I did notice. So sometimes if someone had an interview with a local radio station, they would have the act for like Eurovision Malta and basically confirming that these posts have been verified and they authorized basically by the Maltese broadcaster and they could go along with it. Um, Whereas I think Aiden's didn't. I remember seeing an interview, he not an interview, an Instagram live he did with Era Losco because they had a song out called RIP, which they were just talking about. And I think Aiden was saying how he wanted to give the fans something because of the way the rules are. You can't like the first time you hear the songs was in those quarterfinals, but you didn't hear the studio of it beforehand. You just had the 30 seconds and that quarterfinal live. Um, so I think that's an interesting rule, but I'll get on to that after. Um, so yeah, I think the petition was kind of showed that there was definitely anger and in Malta. I remember reading the comments of the petition and I was thinking these people are genuinely upset because although not many people, I think, in the Eurovision sphere know Aiden is quite a real popular artist in Malta now. Like he keeps getting like loads of number ones on the radio chart. He gets a lot of he does really well on like Malta, Apple Music, and Spotify. So he's not like at Emma Muscat level, like big pop star, but he is popular. So this is quite a big deal. Um, I mean, I think it was nice that he was able to do the interval act. I think it because with some disqualifications, it's sometimes, oh, you've been disqualified, you broke a rule, that's it. Whereas I think it was nice that he was able to at least have his chance to perform. I think it's very much like the camp scene in Camp Rock where Mitchie gets disqualified from Final Jam, and then the band's like, "Oh yeah, you can come back because the competition's finished." It's very much the Maltese version of that to me, but it was nice that he was able to sing his biggest songs as well, and he got a really big reception from the crowd, which I think that meant a lot to him. I think. Um, it just showed that no matter, despite everything that's happened in that couple weeks span, that people still support him, and hopefully he'll be back next year, um, and hopefully go all the way. We'll see. Who knows?
Yeah, I think I really liked you touching on him coming back, particularly because I think what that does suggest is that the whole experience probably wasn't especially great for him, but I'm hoping that there is no sort of lingering bad blood between him and the broadcaster, which means that we may well still hopefully be seeing him on the stage. I think, again, you touch on a lot of the really interesting points in terms of the fact that he was not the only one doing a lot of social media promotion. And it was something that it took a little bit of time for them to clarify. There was so much discussion previously around what was it that he'd actually done. And it took PBS a little bit of time to actually come out and say, this is the rule, these are the rules that he broke. And it was all the speculation about was it his dance moves that got him disqualified because you weren't supposed to have sort of full choreography in the quarterfinals and things like that. And again, I think it is really helpful in terms of transparency from the broadcaster for them to have shared that, even if it is something that was then contested because, yeah, other participants were also doing promotion. I think it's also very much worth clarifying that assuming PBS is telling the truth about this, that the fact that they have said, we did tell Aidan several times to stop doing this and he didn't listen, I think that does at the very least mean it's not sort of, I think there was a possible assumption that people had made that he hadn't been made aware of the rules properly, or he was just doing what other people were doing. And I think knowing that, yeah, they had said, mate, tone it down a little bit. Like I say, assuming they are telling the truth and they did say that, I think that does again help to clarify things a little bit more. It is lovely that a lawsuit didn't happen, and hopefully it does mean we'll be seeing him back because, like you said, he has become such a huge artist in Malta in the last few years. And I remember last year, even after the success of Ritmu, he was doing the whole pre-party circuit. He has such enthusiasm about wanting to share the Maltese language on an international stage. And I really, really hope maybe next year or the year after, we will see him come back with a song that is just as good, if not better, than the songs that we have heard from him in MESC so far. And we'll see him get to that Eurovision stage as well. And so, while we had Aidan down as a potential winner with everything that went on, our winner, as we've mentioned, is the Busker with Dance Our Own Party. So, my final question to you, Danny, is what do you think of Malta's chosen entry and how well do you think it will do for them at Eurovision this year?
I actually really like the song that they've chosen. I wasn't sure at first with the snippet, but again, I think it's difficult to visualize the performance just from the quarterfinal, that with the LED. I think when we saw the semi-final performance, you could tell there was a lot of thought that was put into how they wanted to present this to the public, and it was unique. You didn't really have an act that had as many like visual effects, like dividing the song into three different acts, and it was very creative, I thought. But they were at a party and they were trying to get away from it because they then had the car that was driving along. I thought that was a clever idea, and then them escaping the party basically. It was a nice touch, and it got a real big reception in the audience. I think people kind of underestimating this song until that semi-final live performance, because that was when people began to see this as a potential contender, basically. Um, and I think but we hadn't really had a song like this either in this like lineup, which again I think helped it to really stand out. And I remember reading in an interview they did with another site, they were saying how some bands tend not to go into MESC because they worry that this style of music will be perceived, basically. And I think it's telling to see that something like this is done so well, and to landslide the televote in the way that it did. It just shows that people wanted something a bit different, I think. In terms of Eurovision success, it's hard to say because the semi-final that they're in is shaping up to be a real bloodbath. And there's so many quite upbeat songs in this lineup so far. And it's very difficult to predict because for one, Malta struggle usually with televote anyway. And now because of the rule change, that with it being 100% televote, it's going to be trickier for them to get the votes. However, I think it's very telling how they've chosen the song that swept the televote, and it's I think it has local appeal. I think people will see the saxophone and people will see the unique staging and will remember it. And it's just whether they'll pick up the phone. I'm hopeful they'll qualify. It's just so hard to say because it's such a tough semi-final.
Yeah, I'm very much with you on that. I fell in love with this song when I heard it at the heats stage of the process, and it had not been on my radar at all until then. And then I heard it, and I love music, and especially sort of pop music with really clear, pure instrumental sounds, I think is probably the best way to describe it. And that brass section, that sax solo, just it hits so well. I love it so much. The whole theming of the performance is wonderful, and I really love that storytelling element to it. But I have to admit, the sax solo does a lot of heavy lifting for me, but it's a really good thing that that sax solo has been going to the gym and it's gotten really swole and it's been benching loads of weights, and it's more than able to carry that song on its shoulders and absolutely take me along for that ride with them. I think they're such personable performers. I think I just love watching them on stage. And I think it is such a shame that they have ended up in semi one, because in semi two I could see them doing very well, but as Danny's mentioned, semi one is such a bloodbath. It's full of such incredibly strong entries, and I would love to see this song in the final, but I do think it's probably a borderline qualifier. I think it's going to depend a lot in terms of what the last few countries end up choosing. I think it's going to depend a lot on the staging. I think it's going to depend a lot on the running order, and I'm desperately hoping they don't put it in slot two. Um, I love this song so much, and I'm so glad it's now out on Spotify as well. We are recording this on the 5th of March, so it came out yesterday. We've heard they have revamped it a little bit, but it's very subtle changes. And I think what they've done to it just lifts the song a little bit. I just think it's lovely. I get a huge smile on my face when I listen to it. So I would really love to see this do well. I genuinely did not think this stood any chance of winning MESC at all. And the fact that it did, I was delighted, and I would really, really love to see them do well, especially because there are other Maltese bands that I would really like to see in Eurovision. I mentioned previously on a podcast episode, I talked about a band called The Travellers, who have similarities in sound to the Busker, heavy sort of acoustic instrumental, particularly brass influences, and very sort of upbeat music, usually singing in Maltese as well. and they've been my dream Maltese act for years. And so I'd love to see them do well and hopefully carve a path for other acts with a more diverse set of styles to have a place for Malta in MESC and in Eurovision as well. So fingers crossed they do well. I am hoping so hard for them. I think they're currently my fourth or fifth in my ranking. And yeah, I'm just delighted that they're there and I hope they get what they deserve.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned like I like the stage how it's been revamped a little bit just to have those finishing touches on the song. Um and as well, I'm hoping if they elevate that staging as well onto a maybe a slightly bigger scale in Liverpool, it will work really well. And I think if the front man like say he can go on to like the not so much the catwalk or whatever it's called on the stage and something, it will work really well. It just will connect the crowd. I think it's a good party song, and um I'm hoping if it opens as something that might be a good thing because at least it's the first song. It gets people up on their feet and gets them really ready for the contest and the remaining songs. Like I said, it's just whether it can stand out because now we have so many of these different songs. Like we've got Serbia, now we've got Norway. There's all potential heavy hitters, all bringing something very different, and it's just a case of who the public are going to respond to at the end of the day. Um, I'm glad you touched on the Travelers as well because they are another popular band that I think they could, if they did MESC or something, they would do very well because of their name. They are another really popular Maltese band, and I'm hoping because of the Busker success, this will open the door to some acts like this. I know Red Electric is one that I've seen a lot of people mention. They'd like to see them in MESC. Um, so I'm hoping if, assuming MESC comes back and we still have like the 40 songs or something, that some of these bigger names will see how the Busker have won with something so different, and it will inspire them to try their luck to see whether they can represent Malta at Eurovision. Because I think it has been noted in the Eurovision fandom that you do get so many pop songs in MESC, and to an extent you did this year, but at least you had like a couple that were a little bit out there for Malta, like such as the Busker. And so yeah, I think if they qualify, that will be a big thing as well. That will really get, I think, inspire other acts to take part and hopefully other big names.
I really like your point about the running order as well. I'm just looking at the acts that they are with in the first half of semi one, and I don't think there is a better opening act in that set. I think Ireland might also possibly be a contender for that sort of spot. I think, again, it's opening with that really upbeat sort of let's get everybody going, let's get everybody on their feet sort of thing. The only song we don't have in that half is Portugal. I'm not sure Portugal will be going for something that is similarly sort of dancey and upbeat. So I really do think that Malta could be a really strong opener for that half of that semi. I'd actually love to see that. I would really, really like to see them opening on that stage. And yeah, just with a slightly elevated staging to really get that energy across and to keep that storytelling as well. So thank you so much for joining me, Danny. It's been wonderful to chat with you about Malta and to hear from somebody who has so much love for Malta and for MESC at Eurovision. As we've mentioned, you are from Phoenix. So, how can people who would like to hear more about what you guys do at Phoenix find out about your work? What are your social medias and website addresses?
Well, thank you for having me, first and foremost. It's been really nice to chat about MESC. And you can follow Phoenix on Twitter and Instagram at Phoenix ESC, and our website is Phoenix ESC as well, I think. Um,
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you very, very soon. Should we say bye?
Bye.
Bye.